Today I'm going to talk about the budget structure, which is called the other aspect, which is the fiscal aspect of the government. Normally, it is always in the earlier lecture, what I had discussed is the fiscal policy, full employment, anti-inflation, economic growth problems, etc. Okay, how the full employment, anti-inflations, as well as economic growth is being addressed through fiscal policy. Okay, and for that, actually, there is a kind of financing is required, and that financing is what is actually done through annual budget provisions. Okay, so there comes the importance of budget, and indeed we all know that for even running a family or doing whatever an individual's act, everything requires budget. In the microeconomics, we started with even budget line. So it is actually the income, the expenditure statement of whichever person or the state. Okay, it doesn't matter. So budget is therefore is very important as far as the public economics aspect is also concerned, because the fiscal aspect, which we have already discussed, the fiscal policy, the government intervention policy is required, therefore income as well as an expenditure plan. So that income and expenditure plan is largely reflected through the annual budget exercise. So there are different kinds of budgets normally, practiced, and people experiments across the world. Uh, we will be discussing briefly, and one budgeting is actually an interesting title, which is called the zero-based budgeting, and then the other budget is called a balanced budget. So these two type of budget is very crucial, especially as something which is different to that of a normal budget. So, in fact, the budget is nothing but how much we are ready to spend, and in order to spend that, what is actually we are going to earn. So this is what is called the budget. So budget is in fact, normally people try to reflect. There are many people says differently about the definition and the function of budget. One among such is actually very radical, and a very simple version is budget is nothing but the will of government. You can see that what is actually will of a person is being reflected in through the budget. So this is what is actually, in a simple way, we can actually define budget. So it's a reflection of the individual's will, or how they want to live, or what should be their pattern of expenditure, etc. So where they are getting money, and how they are, if they are not getting money, whether there is a financing possibility, etc. Okay, so this is what is called a simple sense of budget. It's a very preliminary thing, and let us not go to that extent, and let us discuss a typical idea which is called the zero-based budgeting. So the zero-based budgeting is a kind of budgeting. You start with a zero base, all right, as the title suggests. So the objective of zero-based budgeting is to reset the clock each year. So this is what is actually they're trying to mean. And traditional incremental budget is actually followed from last year. Okay, whatever you've done in the last year, you continue with it. So this is what is called incremental budget. So this is normally everybody follows. Okay, what I spend today, I'll be following a lead from that, and I continue spending, because maybe I have commitment in this day, and that I will be either repudiate, or I'll actually pledge, or I'll just realize that next day. So this is what is called an incremental budget in that sense, simplest sense. Whereas a zero-based budget is every year you start with a blank slate, and you start, making your own expenditure and income statement in every year. All right. So this is what is called as reset the clock. Okay. And this traditional incremental budget assumes that there is a guaranteed budgetary base the previous year. Level of appropriations, and the only question is how much of increment will be given in this year. Okay, so this is what is actually under an incremental budget. So zero-based budgeting implies that managers need to build a budget from the ground, okay, and building a case for their spending as if no baseline existed to start at zero. So every year you start afresh. So resources are not necessarily allocated in accordance with the previous patterns, and consequently each existing item of expenditure has to be annually rejustified. This is what is actually under a zero-based budget. The beginning, what normally been seen as a zero-based budget. Okay, now um, uh, the purpose of zero-based budget is to reevaluate and re-examine all programs and expenditure for each budgeting cycle by analyzing workload and efficiency measures to determine priorities or alternative levels of funding for each program or expenditure. Through this system, each program is justified in its entirety each time a new budget is being developed. So this is what was actually the as an objective being set for zero-based budget. So zero-based budget or some modified version of it has been used in private and public sector for decades. The first known application of zero-based budgeting was by the US Department of Agriculture in 1962. However, the general problem of incremental budgeting that zero-based budgeting attempts to solve has been recognized from a much earlier period. So, indeed, the major next application in the state level or government level was been or had been introduced by the Jimmy Carter government in Georgia. So in the early 1970s. So in the private sector, the major leap forward occurred with the development of Texas Instrumenting of a way of handling the mass data. This involved the implementation of the decision package approach to prepare a 1970s budget for staff and research division. Okay, so this is what was actually the history of zero-based budget. It started in the United States, by implemented in a government level by Jimmy Carter, a later president of United States, in his Georgia state. So this is what was actually the history says. Now, why people do this? Because it is actually for some reason it gives newness, like a freshness in the kind of implementation. So you can change whatever you've done earlier. You can actually even forgo whatever commitment you have given. So everybody can actually start from the beginning, from the scratch. This is in fact, for some people it is very lucrative. Okay, for others may not be, but that is what is actually the basis of zero-based budgeting, and what is the application of zero-based budgeting. The practical application of zero-based budgeting involved to use the decision package. All budgetary procedures involved in identification of organizational objectives. So, in the context of these zero-based budget involves three different stages, that is identification of a decision unit, development of a decision package, a review and ranking of a decision package. So this is how actually they are normally implement the zero-based budget. First they will be identifying, then they develop a decision, and then they will be reviewing and ranking accordingly, and then they will be go for it. So the existing organizational structure identify the unit in the hierarchy of which budget are prepared, and these could responsibly center cost centers, profit centers, investment centers, or program categories or program elements, etc. So this is the starting point for identifying decision. And a specific manager should be clearly responsible for the operation of this program. And it must have a well defined and measurable impact, and it must have this is what is the objective which they set in that context. They basically this first process or first sort of in the first phase of Zero-based budgeting. So after the identification of appropriate decision unit, the next step is to prepare for each of these a document describing the objectives or purpose of the decision unit and the action that could be taken to achieve them. Such document is called decision package, which is so what are the decision packages? So there are two types of decision package. A, the mutually exclusive decision package, which means the purpose here is to identify for each decision unit the alternative ways of performing its function so as to enable management to choose the best alternative. So, one such alternative will be to abolish the decision unit and not to perform it functional at all. Okay. So, this is what is actually the departure point from the cumulative sort of a budgeting which we had said earlier, or the conventionally followed budget. So the second type of decision is actually incremental decision package. That is, each manager identify different levels of effort and associated costs and their impact on the function. That is, there will be a minimum level below which it would be impossible to perform the function of that particular unit, where a base level which reflects the current level of activity and improvement level which shows the effect of increase over the current level. So these are the two basic point where you even continue from what you have done last year, but every year you see this is a second strategy. Every year you maybe start afresh, but you set a certain level of standard and then you say that whether you have to go beyond or whether you have to keep that sustained level of funding in that particular area. So this is what is actually comes under the second function of or type of decision package under the zero based budget function. Okay. So the third one is actually review and ranking of decision. Once you set the baseline, or whether it is an incremental kind of decision or the mutually exclusive decision package, uh, once you set that, then you will be reviewing it. So has been prepared. They are ranked on an ordinal scale. That is, which sector has to be given priority, which department has to get what, and then you rank accordingly and then you prioritize the thing. This is prioritizing is what is called ranking. So you scale it and then you try to fund accordingly. So the situation where bottom up approach and due to large number of decision package the ranking process take place at a number of levels. So this is what is actually, so it is bottom up approach, so where you requires in fact more trust as well as concentration that requires in fact a lot of effort than the centralized allocation of normal budgetary provisions. So many people used to say this has to be followed in any not in an so this is actually not possible when it is completely an incremental level based. Why? Because for example, if I want to do some developmental activities of a particular place, then I should know that what is actually the problem and the priority of that particular region in terms of that particular, with regard to that particular sort of a project. Okay, so once I know that particular project and the allied thing, then I'll be allocating resources accordingly. So for that, I should have a ground knowledge as well as the requirements. So once I have done that, then I'll actually rank and then ask for the budget allocation. So this is actually therefore comes from the bottom up, okay, approach. So this is in that. But whereas if you know that the Indian kind of a budgeting, so always we have apprehension that you have a centrally sponsored scheme, and even the state doesn't have, or that particular region may not be having a sort of applicability of or benefit from that particular project they cannot implement there. So this is not addresses the problem with the kind of way which is called the traditional incremental budgetary system. Whereas this problem has been reviewed, this problem has been addressed through this zero-based budgeting. So that is why they are trying to say this is a very novel as well as a new concept in that sense. So, how would you choose the decision unit? That is actually the question. Now, suppose you are the chief executive of a local authority, and there are five departments under your responsibility, and you ask the manager in charge of educational department to adopt it. So, this is a big question as far as the functioning of anything, any budget provision. This is very important to think also, because if you are the chief and you are asking some person from the five department, then you choose one of the department representatives. So the interest may, the critic says that the interest may be actually biased towards that particular person's department. Using educational services as an example, first the decision unit could be at any of the following level. That is why the service level with the whole of the education service being one decision unit, the whole of highway services being one decision unit, and so on. The division of service level, which of education would mean the whole of primary education being one decision unit, the whole of secondary education being one unit, and the university education may be on the other. So you may be having different than professional education. You can have different sort of priorities, and then the department person may be allocating accordingly. So earlier, this is what is actually the classic case in Kerala is you have only education ministry. So department of education was there. Now department of education, then people had said that our school education was really good, but our university education and professional education is not up to that mark. Why? Because and professional education normally comes in different other department. For example, if it is an agricultural university, then it comes under the Ministry of Agriculture. So if it is fisheries, then comes under the fisheries department, and so on. So specialization. I'm not talking about specialization, but in the university level education and all, higher education and all, the higher education attention of higher education was very weak. Was very weak. This was the argument, and they put up, and they split the ministry into two. So higher education ministry now, and you have a school education, general education ministry. So earlier, it has always been a critic that the school education was actually, this is the problem which I said. If I have a five department, then normally if I employ one, then that person's thing is actually always being get. So this is a criticism. In fact, it is not what is actually we have to bother much about. But this part has to be kept in mind, that there is a possibility of a natural bias even in that approach. But nonetheless, given that fact is positive or so, we need not to worry about it. But we other things are actually more interesting as far as this thing is concerned. And the subdivision of service level, which would mean that each school would be one decision unit, or the school department level, which each department, such as history, physics, again. So you have all sort of prioritization, micro understanding of what was actually it requires in the ground level. So this is what is actually the sort of an upper hand of this particular decision making. And in Connect, once you make all that decision, and then you rank, and then you review, and then you say that which one has to be given more importance, whether you have to give more priority. And many people say that you have to give more priority to the science departments. This is a larger trend in everywhere, not only in India but also elsewhere in the world. This is mostly the trend. That is, the science departments largely get a larger fund. At the same time, the social science departments gets very less. This is an apprehension which is always had with the people. So people always having this particular apprehension in that sense. So in connection with this, people maybe actually, ask for or the priority. Once if you have somebody from the university, this is in fact a very good example to say that if some head of the institution comes from a particular background, then they will be favoring that kind of an education. So this is a normal trend. So even when you say the decentralization, this sort of bias would always be there. Okay, so but despite all that fact, there should be some attention from a ground level than an absolutely incremental sort of allocation of budgeting. That is a centralized sort of a allocation provision. So that is why people say that in the thorough sort of review which takes place in every stage, at least some sort of justification we can ensure um, uh, through this budget. Okay, so agency should ensure that the basic decision units selected are not so low in the structure as to result in excessive paperwork and review. On the other hand, the unit selected should not be so high as to mask important consideration and prevent meaningful review of the work being performed. With regard to the decision package, the intention is to identify alternative ways of performing the function of a decision unit and to determine the effect of different levels of effort on each alternative. Some experts suggest that in practice, it is adequate first to select the best alternative from among the mutually inclusive decision package and then to use this as a basis for the incremental decision package analysis. Now, I don't want to. So this is a very simple thing. So I don't want to talk about that. So this we can yeah. So reviewing has already been done. So this is what is precisely the review. So what is actually the criteria which normally people try to apply for implementation? Okay, that is the process is inherently political, and the ranking of, as I began with the saying, the definition of a budget is actually the political will. So it is therefore largely political. And ranking of the decision at each level of consolidation to be taken by a special committee and usually is determined by a system of voting. So facilitate the ranking criteria should be developed and enforced, such as whether the activity is specifically required by law, whether the organization has the resources and technical skills to implement the activity, whether the package is cost effective, whether the package will be politically acceptable, etc. So these are the things which they are more concerned about, and the way can be attached to each criteria. And remember that it is also political, as I said, as well as the will of the state, will of the government. So that is going to be reflective in taking the decision, and the result of weighing is also therefore connected with that sort of a political will form the basis of the ranking exercise. So that is in fact the baseline of ranking exercise, because each decision package would be considered and every consolidation level, this would involve an enormous administrative burden in that sense. So when I say that it is decentralized, it doesn't mean that actually it doesn't have any sort of, and even in the incremental budget, this is the process which normally uh, they seek. So it is not actually right to say that they don't ask. For example, if university requires, then if the university asks every department to prepare their budget of that year and then send it. So that you have to write plan and non-plan expenditure of that year, and then you have to send it. So every department has it. So the university level it consolidates, and then again they prioritize certain things, they cut off there certain things. Normally the amount of the consolidated amount would be many more times than actually the university can ask, but there the rationing and all will come, and that will be sent to this same process again will take place in the higher level, that is in the university level or in the Department of Education secretary level. And from there, that department finalizes how much money has to be allocated for Department of Higher Education or in the university branch. Similar cases would be actually applicable in the professional university kind of allocation. Then this is actually follows from every department, and they seek the thing, and they will basically get all the fund, the statement of expenditure, which is the expected statement of expenditure, and they consolidate. Then they will see that what is actually the income which is in that year particularly flows. Based on that, they will be having some sort of another question. So, what happens with the zero-based budget, with that of the incremental budget, is that incremental budget, even though you seek everything, doesn't ensure that it will be giving you. Whereas a zero-based budget is actually because your own commitment, everything has been, or prior commitments you can't refrain from with the incremental budget. So once you make a commitment, then that has to be fulfilled in the next year, coming year. For example, if you offer this year that you will be building a building, then for that you may be giving some portion of amount. But if you don't give the continuous amount, or the next phase of or next what you call installment of money in the next budget, this project is going to be a redundant project, because there is no money, then the work would be stopped. So, therefore, what is actually in that incremental budget case is actually you will continue with your earlier commitment. So, what happened is that you have to go for your commitment. Then you cannot, in fact, realize other needs which is actually come up afresh. Therefore, this is actually hampers what is actually the new developmental projects. So, this is the difference, but that is not the case with the zero-based budget. Zero-based budget is never have a continuous commitment in that sense. So, if you want to build something this year, you build it. Next year, build afresh. Okay, okay. Then it doesn't mean that you don't actually you. I mean, the implication is that you can also have a whatever income and expenditure of the last year, just scrap whatever left is you will start with. So this is a kind of a small difference in the form of budgeting in that two particular two different level of budget making process. So because each decision package, let's come back to our discussion, would be considered, that is, each decision package would be considered at every consolidation level. This would involve an enormous administrative burden, as I said. So, one approach that has been proposed to reduce the burden is through the use of cutoff points at each level of consolidation. That is, at the first consolidation level, a cutoff point of, say, 75% of the total budget request for that level might be applied, so that only those packages falling below this cutoff point would be reviewed and ranked at the next consolidation level. So, what is the benefit, as I keep telling? So, the benefit or the strength of the zero-based budget, unlike the incremental traditional line item, it does not assume that last year's allocation of resources is necessarily appropriate for the current year. All the functions of an organization are re-evaluated annually from a zero base. So, systematic nature of such a fundamental review imposes a discipline on the organization, which has produced in practice secondary advantage. So, it produces in a readily accessible form more and better management information. This is turn will improve the quality of management decision, etc. Then another advantage is that it stems from the improved management information. Its production involves the participation of lower level management in the budgetary process, and the smaller the decision unit, the greater this involvement will be. Unexpected events that occur during the financial year can be more readily adjusted for. This is because the basic information for modifying goals has already been generated. If implemented well, zero-based budget can eliminate a sense of entitlement to cost increase. So, improved discipline in developing budgets, more meaningful budget discussion during plan review session, etc. So, this is what is actually the strength of zero-based budget. Whereas there are a lot of problem with the zero-based budgeting, the vast overestimates man's ability to calculate is the first one. And in practice, the effect of different levels of effort on each alternative mutually exclusive decision package are not considered. Due to the shortage of budgetary cycle or fund and need for expediency, but this might lead to a suboptimal allocation of resources. So, by incorporating performance measures in the formation of decision package, it forced managers to establish a preference for effectiveness, efficiency, or quality as they try to rank decision package. So, this makes the ranking process difficult. The use of cutoff point for packages is different in public agencies. As a result, when funds become tight, even zero-based system, each department is asked to make marginal reductions rather than eliminate the lowest ranked programs. The implementation of a zero-based budgeting system requires a great deal of time on the part of agency staff, limiting their ability to perform other important functions. Again, attempts by agencies to manipulate priority listing by ranking popular items lower than items that would have little chance of funding. Established programs have political support and they will continue to receive their share of budget regardless of any analysis produced. So this is what has actually been understood in terms of this zero-based budget is that of the cumulative budget. So incremental budget is just traditionally been followed. So this is about this lecture, and then now we have also the um, issues to be discussed are um, balanced budget. Okay, so let me go to that also. Okay, before that, let me ask you something. So I'll stop the presentation for the time being. So if you do you have any question? Hello, 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 hello. Is the lecture audible? Hello. Ah, tell me. Do you have any question from previous lectures or this lecture?